context, if we keep it one at a time, just user action.
No, I fully agree with that. It's also the ones I wrote actually in glossary.
Yeah.
You have the current two use case for the current two entities we have if you open that one. So I'm fully on board with that. So we can take that approach, but then still, what is the process? So yeah, we take one use case at a time. I listed two there right now. If you open them, we can look at them. And then we evolve the bounded are you suggesting we drop the bounded context stuff as well, or you want to keep following that? You suggest you want to keep a glossary as well, or do you want to drop that?
I don't see any of the existing ones as necessary to our activity, to that activity. I can see them as being notes we've taken and we can refer to, but I don't think any of them are necessary for the approach that I'm suggesting. Because we're starting on the smallest unit, and the point is to avoid big discussions that look too far ahead. Really what's guiding this is the whole you ain't gonna need it strategy, which is, it doesn't matter if this thing is a canonical claim or not in the way I phrase it right now. I know I want canonical claims. I don't know if it's a duplicate or not, but we've just said we want to use to be able to come into the system and say, I'm adding a sentence that I consider to be a claim. We don't have to discuss what a claim is. We could probably agree that's something a user does, and we could design a model for that. Now, if you want to say, well, what if it's a duplicate claim? Let us make that a separate use case that we discuss in the next step, because it may require refactoring our models. At the moment we refactor our models, we can rename things or whatever according to the current.
Yeah, but no, so the whole discussion here that I was trying to have is I don't want to refactor the model that I suggest to work on right now for the case of identifying duplicates and curation and all that stuff.
What do you mean you don't want to refactor?
I don't think we should consider it the same set of use cases. I don't think we should consider it the same bounded context. I don't think we should consider it the same domain model, because that's gonna be, I think, what allows us to, we need to be able to draw the line, and those are the lines I suggested last time. And all I was suggesting now, while diving into the distinction that I originally saw between statement and claim, was that I see three different bounded contexts already right now. One is for curation, the other one is for modeling, the one that you suggest we use case per use case build on. I fully agree there. But I also see a third one, which is argument mining. And that's more like linking the claims within an argument model to sources where they are mentioned, which is a lot in line with what Society Library does. So I'm fully on board with your approach. I would just suggest to make the distinction between these three, which I didn't have time to draw in a diagram, but I think you can see it in front of you. They do cover slightly different use cases.
Yeah, but okay, but what is the also
modeling?
That's fine, but what is the purpose of bounded context?
Not polluting one big domain model that covers everything, basically. So if the discussion,
but for what, we're not polluting in what sense? What is the problem you're avoiding?
Focus to
focus is not a problem. What problem are you fixing?
Wasting time, I think.
Focus is not a problem.
I think but like decomposing systems is a waste of time if there's no need to do it.
It's not pre-decomposing. The whole reason that I brought up the distinction of curation was exactly because we were lacking focus in the thing that we all do share.
No, but the focus is provided by doing one use case at a time and considering against what we've built up so far. That is as much focus as I think we need. I see you need a bounded context when, one, you, Marc-Antoine, I guess we're hearing yard work in the background or something.
Marc-Antoine?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but like, if we decide we want to use the exact same word as a model for a totally different purpose, that would be an indication of creating a bounded context. Another one is if we consider that use case to not be relevant to the model we're designing right now, in the sense, and not relevant usually would be in the sense of, well, some people don't want that in the system, right? So it's got to be like an optional use case, something like that. That would be a key to say, okay, we need to put this somewhere because people are going to want it.
I'm fully aligned there, and I think what happened is I heard a use case and I was saying I don't want it to be in argument modeling. But let's make it more concrete and let's look at the concrete use cases then to continue to make this more practical rather than
and I think that
discussion.
The important thing is like one at a time. Last time we were like everyone was proposing use cases and everybody was editing, and we should do one at a time.
And if somebody says, but what if or whatever, it probably means you want to put another use case there on the list.
Yes.
And just evaluate the model according to if it supports the use cases we've talked about up to now. Don't worry about future use cases.
So where do we store the list of use cases? I suggested the Trello card there next to the glossary, because in my
folks. I'm obviously
use cases use the terminology of the glossary. Otherwise,
I'm obviously not part of this process anymore. Ciao. Have fun. Enjoy.
Oops.
What just happened?
Well, Felix doesn't, Felix, Marc-Antoine is upset because we keep restarting. I understand his feeling. I understand his frustration, to the point that if we had another meeting along the lines of the way this meeting was going, I would have left, because I'm frustrated with, once again, talking about abstractions, right? And in my experience, abstractions are where you get nothing done. So I understand his frustration. I don't know if there's a way to reconcile right now how he feels. If somebody wants to propose an olive leaf, an olive branch, please do. I understand his frustration. I don't want to lose him, but I think we're at polar opposites at the moment, and I don't see us able to work together.
The reconciliation I saw was that the use cases he mentions and is more interested in are within different bound contexts that I don't think we want to focus on right now. And I think that was one of the things I tried to highlight with separating out the whole curation thing, which doesn't remove that discussion altogether. It might just postpone it and might be some loose placeholders to pick up later, because I do agree we will get there at some point, because judging by your white paper, that's also what you want to do.
So maybe the right thing to do is evolve an argument mapping model, and then say, this is what we've got so far, this is the long history of why and all the things to support, and then integrate him by saying, okay, we're ready to talk about what we understand are the things you want, and we can start with what you need to support it or whatever. I don't know. Another way to get him back in would be to what I proposed previously, which is alternate days, where we have a more abstract discussion on one day and a more concrete bottom-up approach another day. In other words, we try both in parallel, but I will not go on with just abstract discussions alone.
It might just be one day to spend time on talking argument creation, the other day talking argument modeling. It can be because I don't necessarily think it's more abstract. They're just different use cases that I fully agree are not the primary focus right now. We just want to say we want to add a declarative sentence to a claim. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
okay, then I propose that we reach out to him for ahead of time for the Friday meeting and say, on Friday we want you to run the meeting, and we will attack the problem according to what way you believe would work best.
I mean, he advocated like pushing through one, like sticking to one method and like pushing through it, and like this current method was basically proposing a model and iterating on that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
So the current method was proposing use cases within the bound context, which we did seem to have some agreement last time between curation and modeling. So it seemed like Mercant1 was on board on that, as long as I was still placed to place use cases within the curation context. And if we can agree on that scope in that sense. The discussion that just started at the start of the meeting now was simply had to do with the provenance of claims, which I also consider a separate. Yeah.
That's the problem. Is I think all these approaches, you know, I think it got closer, but I think all these approaches invite way too much speculation about what needs to be supported in the future, and it leads to hesitation and leads to misunderstandings in terms, because people get afraid that you're not going to support something they want, and you think you're saying something else, and then you spend half an hour discussing about what you actually said with it. I don't think that's productive, which is why, unfortunately, I'm proposing once again the most bottom-up possible and refactoring as we go, which as a programmer, after 10 years of software development, I learned not to design everything ahead of time. I learned
It's
the
not ahead
best
of
system. You
don't
know,
design it
my
ahead of time.
system, I've been refactoring one system for 5 years over constant changes and pivots, and it's worked. It still works. It's still maintainable because I only put in what I need now, and I refactor the moment I need something new, right?
Sorry, I was obviously had a sugar crash and had a bad access of bad temper. Sorry about that. Triggered by Yagni. I do feel that the whole I'm all for bounding and defining the context. I'm all for starting from use cases, but I do feel sometimes it's a way to exclude use cases and saying, oh, this is not part of my system, so I don't care and I don't want to hear about it. And I really get the feeling that we have to respect one another's systems and needs. And that's not what I'm hearing now. And that's why I had that very bad emotional reaction, and for which I apologize.
Cool. We're glad to have you back, Marc-Antoine. I was bummed that you left.
And what I was saying is I understand your frustration, and
I understand yours,
I
by
think
the
we're all
way.
extremely, yeah. But I do think we're sort of at polar opposites in this point, in our frustration, which is you want to ensure that every use case is getting included, and I want to avoid talking about anything but the smallest, most immediate use case and build up from there. So I think we're at polar opposites. And the thing I was bringing up, because obviously I really, really value your presence in here. You've changed my mind many times, which I consider myself stubborn and not easy to change. So I want you in this every step of the way. I personally can't go on with, you know, I think higher, more abstract approaches. And so what I was thinking is proposing maybe if it's about, you know, sticking to approach, with the current approaches, I don't think I can do. If you want to stick with two approaches, which is a totally bottom-up approach one day, and sticking with defining some things, or however you want to go about the second approach the other day, I'm all for that.
That could be done.
But
listen, I understand I do want to say I do understand your frustration because we spend a lot of time. I do feel, you know, we are speaking a lot about there's a feeling of complexity that escapes me. Yes, I do try to think of many points, but many points we've agreed on. Like for me, the very difficult thing to accept, and it seems to me we've been through it already, is the many relationship between symbols and topics, or in another way, declarative sentence and claims. That many relationship is not obvious. But once you have that, a lot of things go down from that. And I think this is part of something you acknowledged already. So I'm a bit like, why the resistance now?
Because like, and I agree that, you know, probably the first 10 meetings will be, you know, creating something no more than what we've already tried to create. Right? It's going to be rehashing what's already been done, but it'll do it in a way that we've all evolved together, the language, the models, the terms, the reasons for those things together, without half an hour discussions on what we meant by that word. And we will be extremely well poised for adding the next one and adding the next one after that, and so on.
I'm not sure it's possible to evolve things together without making sure we agree on the word's meaning. And for me, these discussions, I know they're fastidious, and I agree, but I mean, we're still finding divergence in how we use terms, and we still need to.
Because we want the word to mean more than just its practical use. Right. Again, like I said as an example, if somebody comes in and they want to create a claim, that's to be debated. So they just enter a sentence into the system. What did that mean by the claim banders? It doesn't matter. The system has just recorded a sentence for them. Bentley?
Oh, sorry.
The music's playing. Yeah, it just recorded a sentence for them. And that's it. We don't have to think about what the next thing is. Then you can say,
there's so many things implied, Tim. That's exactly where the problem lies.
No, it doesn't matter.
It
doesn't matter what it implies. What it implies is something that needs to be captured by the next use case, which we can discuss next time, right? Because what is the next use case that...
You're basically suggesting that the definitions of the terms evolve when...
According to the use cases, step by step. Yes. And this is one of the major realizations I had as a software developer and designer, was the moment I stopped being afraid of refactoring. The moment I stopped worrying about what needs to be done next, because I was confident that I could just move things a little bit and it would handle the next case, was the moment I created flexible systems that could last years and be maintainable every step of the way. And that's what we need to do with terminology here, is not worry about if the word claim in this model matches what philosophers have defined as a claim 20 years, 200 years ago or whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is in the system we call it that. And if there's a use case that shows that that term is inadequate or not right or whatever, let's throw in that use case, have that discussion, and rename things. Right?
Yeah, I've had the exact opposite experience with refactoring. I got myself in dead ends design-wise by trusting the early design and hoping I could refactor it, and ending up with design that was unmaintainable. It happens.
And that's fine as well. It's still, we're going together, and oftentimes we do completely rewrite an application when we get to that point.
And the thing is, I've been rewriting this many times, and I want to not redo the things I already did and abandoned because they were dead ends. I did that, it didn't work. I want to move on to the next stage because I have thought about more use cases, and I have not, I've taken them one at a time. I got into a dead end, I've abandoned that, and I want to move on.
Right, but we need to go through that in an accelerated fashion. Our mind, we cannot absorb all of your learning in a couple of hours.
Yeah, but it means like Marc-Antoine can influence the initial design, so we don't step into these traps again.
And what I'm saying is, let's not look at use cases one at a time. Let's look like, yes, I understand then what you're saying about let's look at them one at a time. But what I'm saying is we have many use cases. Let's look at least the minimal system that satisfies a lot of them. And what I find often is use cases I introduce being pushed away, or that's for a later system. I'm trying to build the later system. Yes, that's a problem in terms of where we both are.
So I think we kind of agreed on splitting it off into 2 days, one focusing top down, one focusing bottom up. So let's just follow that process. Technically, Tuesdays are the top down. So maybe we should continue with Marc-Antoine's discussion, and we'll have Tim head us off on
I half agree with that. I think Marc-Antoine is maybe proposing a shortcut and us all going together, because it's a question of, are we wasting time, right? You know, which you know, maybe begs the question: is there a minimal model that we could all start from that'll get us, you know, 5 sessions ahead, and start from there instead of starting with a user enters a sentence? I don't know.
I think that's what we have been doing. I think.
Yeah, I think that's the question. Do people think or not?
I mean, I think we could try that on Tuesdays, and then we'll try the other way on Fridays. And when we find out one works better than the other, we'll switch.
Yeah, what Stephen's been proposing, and I did agree with that, is it's true that I bring a bunch of use cases and there are a lot to consider at one time, and can we carve them in subdomains and layers? And I agree with that. Now, we may not be agreeing where to put the boundaries, and that's one of those long, painful processes. But I'm carving subdomains and layers is something I think is useful. That doesn't mean, and that's what why I reacted so badly, that doesn't mean excluding the other domains. It means putting them in a box, but it doesn't mean, oh, this is not what we're building now, so let's not consider it for the minimal model. And this is why I reacted badly to the, no, let's look at one thing at a time.
Right. But that's kind of why I reacted.
Marc-Antoine was, I think when I showed the last bounded context diagram, first of all, I fully agree. We also need to look at the other domains. We don't want to exclude them from the overall system because they cover use cases that are very important and needed down the road. So I fully agree there. But if you remember the whole discussion of downstream, upstream, why I said later, it's because these other subdomains, I intuitively, and after having also worked on this for a decade now, I know they all depend on the central thing we can more easily agree on first. So that I'm not saying we have to skip it. I'm just saying this first thing, the argument modeling context, is the most important one to focus on first.
So yeah, the one thing I would say is that's kind of what we were doing before, but my negative reaction was that I thought it still wasn't focused enough. Because when you're focused on a single use case and you just have a queue of use cases, you're going to pull one off and we're going to talk about it and add it to the model. Nobody's going, well, why aren't we talking about this bubble over here? Why aren't we talking about that bubble? We know we're focused. That's just the focus we need is one thing. And we know we're only talking about that one little thing. And it's not a big bubble of possibilities. One little action that a user makes.
Yeah. But we just started speaking about boundaries. That means we just started negotiating the boundaries. And this will take time. Now, one thing that may be unproductive is all sitting on all the calls. Maybe we need to divide and conquer. And, you know, but what?
Yeah, I think we need to do it together because it's learned. We need to walk this together.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that defining boundaries is something we need to go together because we may not agree on how to divide and conquer. But I think at some point we'll have boundaries well enough defined that we'll be able to go into subgroups on
And boundaries can change when new use cases come in. In a way, Timothy, I really don't actually understand the objection you're bringing in, because it sounds very much like the suggestion that was made last meeting, where we do look, each addition to the model needs to come in through a use case. We wanted to start listing all the use cases. The only difference that I'm suggesting was the fact that we always keep in mind within which bound context this use case covers, starting out with argument modeling, which I think you intuitively just call the simple thing that we all seem to agree on. The only problem I saw was that we didn't all seem to agree on that, and narrowing that down
It's
so
because
that
it's still looking too far ahead. It's still looking too far ahead. I want us to have the discipline of not worrying about something not being included, and not worrying about this not matching the future or whatever, because that, I think, is what blocks us. And so if you're already drawing with giant bubbles, then you're not allowing them to evolve naturally. Yeah. And you're worried about, is this bubble,
they
just the bubbles rather than the use case.
That exist right now. All it is that there are bubbles that exist. When we say claim, in the context of curation, we have entire different interpretations than when we say claim in the context of argument modeling. That's a fact.
Yeah, but you can live with temporary ambiguity while you're focusing on a different area that's more important to cover. We can't cover all the words in the diagram at the same time. We have to choose a priority, and the priority we suggest is the minimal use case most likely to agree on, and when we say everything else is out of that, it was implied earlier, but it was not meant that we're excluding anything from the system. We discussed that. That was an improper discussion. It's just a matter of prioritization and focus.
But here maybe it's possible there's an irreconcilable thing, and I would rue it because it would definitely be too bad. But the question of what's out of scope finally, when you say looking too far ahead, for me, for what you call looking too far ahead, for me is the core of the system. And maybe we won't resolve that. It's possible. and the question is, can what I call the core be resolved in a reasonable amount of time? And this is maybe why we should split and have two paths. And maybe that's a good idea to have two paths. The question is, can we resolve the core as I see it? Which is bigger than your core. That is just a fact.
Yeah, I kind of feel trying to reconcile these two paths is probably the biggest waste of time. Let's just go down both and see which one works. So I propose we change the conversation to Marc-Antoine presenting his vision for today, and then, well, except we're going to have a problem because we're skipping Friday because it's January 1st and some of us are going to have hangovers.
Well, I concretely would actually like, because I get Timothy's suggestion, but can it be made more concrete? Because it doesn't sound too different than what we've been trying to do before. So what concretely do you suggest?
Okay.
Couldn't we concrete that during the meeting about that?
No, let's...
Let me state what I propose in very simple terms, and then see what you think about it. We start a blank slate. I know that's frustrating, but we start with a blank slate. Okay. We start with a single use case, as simple as possible. And people can propose and add. Trello board probably works really well for this. Propose more use cases. They need to be as granular, as specific as possible. Generally, like instead of a use case or whatever, well, I guess it's a use case. It's not a user story. It's a single user action or a system action. And what we do is we take that use case, and if we have a totally blank slate, which we will for the first one, we create a model for that is only sufficient to handle that use case. If the model already exists, we modify the model only enough to handle that addition to the use case. And we continue. If for each use case, if some people agree it needs to be in the system, there's three options for each use case. Yes, it's in the system. And this brings up other questions, but I'll simplify it by saying, yes, it's in the system, or it's optional for the system, or no, it should definitely not be in the system. I don't know if that's ever going to be something that comes up, but those are probably the three options. Now, I would then say, then with that step, we consider the domain. Does this belong to this domain, which would be this subsystem or whatever, or should we put it? And here I don't know if it's a bounded context or if it's a separate subsystem, or if I don't know. That's another kind of discussion we need to talk about. But it's basically, yes, this applies right now to what we're doing. It's the next step. Let's discuss it and modify the model. Or no, it belongs outside this here. We probably table it and choose another one that looks like the next step in use cases. And we slowly evolve the model that way. I mean, I think that's fundamentally it. It requires refactoring of, on different levels, on the model itself and on subsystems, layers, maybe bounded context.
Yeah. Okay. The interesting thing is that it's not refactoring about software, but refactoring about design. So they just
correct. It's design refactoring. Yes.
What you're proposing, I mean, on the one hand makes sense, but I just foresee that the question is, what happens when there's a disagreement about which system it falls in, and what happens to things that are pushed outside of the core? I mean, and we're not agreeing on what's in core and out core, and that's the problem. And this procedure doesn't quite resolve this. Now, that said, I do think that what a counter proposal is when something is outside
wait, can I first answer your question about what happens when that happens? Okay. That is the moment when we have that discussion about should it be in that system, should it not be, why, where do we see that? Because we're discussing those important topics, but focused on a very specific circumstance. And that is when I think those discussions will be the most productive.
Right.
Those are the moments when we have the big discussion.
What I suggest, and this is, you're suggesting, I'm suggesting, this is not, I want to do this very openly. We should make a stab at defining what we see as the core, each of us. And let's see if there's a way to layer one on top of the other. There's no question that my core is bigger than yours, but is there a way to layer one on top of the other? And that could be interesting. Whether we do it through layering at the model level or at the use case level, maybe both are worth trying. I don't know. But
so I consider that to be like the fundamental defining question between you and your work and what the original idea of the canonical debate was. That is the fundamental defining question, and it came up very early on, which is, really, should your work be an extension, like a layer 2 of the canonical debate, or should the canonical debate be an expression, a restriction, constraint on your more fundamental system? I understand.
Yeah, and I do believe the latter. Yes. Yeah.
I know. So I think that is. And I think I agree with you. I understand your apprehension. I totally agree with you. That would be a bad thing to force you to go through all of this step by step, and at the very end realize we don't want to incorporate your work, or just it's incompatible. I understand that. So that, I think, in fact, should be the fundamental topic for the second day, perhaps. Like, I think we should go bottom up and not try to take a stab at what we think should be in the system or not. We should let it evolve with those core questions coming out in disagreements. But we should accelerate the question of whether or not your work is fundamentally compatible, and if the canonical debate should be built on top or vice versa, right? I think that should be the other half of our discussion.
Yeah, and yeah, no. So I think the question of basically use cases, which I consider core and you don't. I mean, this will be a boundary, and the question is, can that be done? Which way should the layers be for that to be possible? I do, yeah. Of course, I have my beliefs there, and I don't
Yeah,
even think
that'll come out in the micro level for the
Yeah.
individual questions, but I don't know if we'll be able to answer it then.
Yeah, but I think doing the layering of the use case bounded domains is definitely, as I said, negotiating the domains, and maybe it's worth trying to negotiate the domains at the use case level.
We didn't even spend one meeting on it. All we had was me
Yeah,
introducing.
I agree
the process,
totally.
and we didn't even try. We gave up there, and that's also why.
Yeah. No, I do want to look at the domain level, and it's true that I understand, Tim, you reacted to me bringing in the diagram and the model to have that bounded domain discussion, but we were trying to define terms because we were disagreeing. We're still disagreeing on terms, me and Stephen. And I do still think we should maybe have a private discussion to just align terminology a bit better and not get everybody to sit through that painful process.
Yeah, again, the bound context, it's also to be able to align terminology better. It's about everything. It's not only about.
No, but I think there's a distinct let's align terminology step so that we can discuss boundaries.
Yeah. If the boundaries aren't drawn, then there are no boundaries. That's what was happening, and has been happening.
And maybe, Tim, you'd be feeling better if we try to define the boundaries in terms of use cases rather than model.
They need to be defined in terms of use cases. The boundary isn't the boundary if you don't link use cases to it.
I'm fine with that. But to speak about the use cases, sometimes we will need vocabulary alignment, and that's what happened.
Use cases use words, so the whole point of DDD is you have use cases, which is pretty much the use cases that Tim says. They define things. These things you add in a glossary of that bounded context. If you ever find that like the constraints are too messy or these things can actually be decoupled, you can start spinning it off into separate bounded contexts. I don't see any real distinction with the process that Timothy suggests, other than actually I don't see a real distinction, to be honest.
The difference is just that the difference is that we're discussing use cases and trying to put them into boxes rather than.
No, that's exactly what I was suggesting. If you open the glossary, you can see I added use cases there that I consider part of argument modeling, the first two. And we listed like a couple more at the end of the meeting.
Right, but what already happened is then you start. It already starts opening to questions of, well, what does this use case mean? What did you mean by claim? What did you mean by this? What did you mean by like? It starts opening. Does this use case include this and that and so on?
Prevent that from happening?
Huh? Yeah.
Does your process prevent that from happening?
Yes, it does, because it's one specific action in a specific case. And if you don't understand, you're using the terminology of everything that was built up before, not the terminology of where you're going, and you can relax on the rest for now, because if you're right, it'll get to where you want to go. But like read one of the use cases there.
Sorry?
Read one of the use cases that's listed there.
The one that I added now is I want to add a claim so that I can use it to model arguments. I want to add a declarative sentence to claim to model different representations for the same claim. So
the first thing that would happen is, first of all, the so I can is a user story. It's a user story. It's not a use case. The so I can, immediately I've heard people say, we haven't even defined argument yet.
Yeah, that's a problem.
But,
that's a very good point. One of the things that we have totally never defined is, what do you add this claim to? That's a very good point. That's why I 3-4 meetings ago suggested we actually need to start talking, what do we define as an argument graph? I suggested
but I suggest we just say a user adds a claim to the system by entering a sentence.
The system, what is the system?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Model that. I will create a box that says claim, and I will create a box that says user, and I will create a link that says user creates claim, and the claim will have a text sentence. Done. And we didn't have a discussion about what any of that meant. And yet I think we all agree we want that thing to happen, regardless of what that meant by the user or whatever.
My users are different than your users. My system is different than your system.
How is it different? How is it different?
I use ASP.NET. I have users that are authenticated through Google two-step verification. I mean,
okay, that is a different use case. That's a totally different use case. Doesn't matter how they got there. Somebody entered a sentence into the system, and we decided to call that a claim, and done. Okay. Now we can move on. What do you want to happen next? Another user comes and adds another sentence. Okay, now we're going to refactor claim to allow an array or a list of sentences.
You said before the claim is linked to a user. Are you saying now it isn't?
I said a user creates a claim.
And then you model the claim.
If we want to have, we can discuss if the system wants to remember who created it. And then we have a pointer for the creator, or what, not pointer, but we have an attribute which is the user that created it. So you have that error. Now, the next use case is some other user adds an alternative sentence for the claim. Okay, now claim needs to have a list of sentences, and the sentence, if we want it to remember it, has a creator. No philosophical discussions. We're evolving a model, and we don't, even if you think that sentences need to be totally unique and canonical themselves and need to have many-to-many relationships or whatever, that will get there. Don't worry about that now. We just said that one thing happens. We all agree that one thing.
What I've been arguing for all this time is exactly that I don't want users within that model. It's a different bound context. I don't want system-specific concerns, as in which users you have or whatever, to be part of our argument modeling discussions. So I would just want to.
So you don't want users to create things?
I do, but that's a separate bound context because my system is different than your system.
Why? What use case?
You don't share
that.
that.
It needs to be a separate bounded context. What use case? Propose a use case, and we can see if your bounded context makes sense. But right now, the ones I mentioned don't require that. You can get your use case on the list, and we will get there, and we'll have to create separate bounded context. But so far, we should all be able to agree that what the 3 use cases or 2 use cases I mentioned, the model we have works, and we haven't wasted time worrying about the future.
Yeah, but the only distinction is what you call the most simple basic use case you want to support are different than the most simple basic use cases I want to support. That's the whole thing, because I want to.
You don't want to support those 2 use cases.
I don't want to work on a shared system. I think that the one thing that we all can share is an argument model, not all the use cases of one specific system. If we can, first of all, agree on how we want to model things, then we can still do our own use cases in our system development.
I'm fully convinced we cannot agree on how we want to model things unless we take it one step at a time, each step explaining the reason why.
But that one does not exclude the other. You can say, you can have use cases from a more developer perspective, from more a.
My objection is a totally different one, Tim. It's that it seems, I feel I've done that. I feel I've explained why is there a many-to-one relationship from claims to sentences? Why is there a many-to-one relationship from sentence to claim? So why does it need to be many-to-many? I've been through the use cases of that, and yeah, sure, we can restart from scratch, but I've been through those steps, and I feel I have to re-go through those steps every time, and I'm like, why? We've done it. I've explained it. And I understand you. Okay, one use case at a time, but the queue of use cases is there, has been written down. I'll write it down again. Sure, But I hope you understand my feeling of exhaustion, because it's like, why restart from scratch when we've been through those steps and we've justified the structure? I feel I've justified my structure. Now, it's possible you've disagree with a step, which is perfectly fine, and then let's argue it out. It's possible you missed a step, or it's possible that there's things that you don't see as necessary. But again, I mean, every single line in my diagram, I have a story for, and I've told it. Now, maybe it wasn't clear enough. That's entirely possible. And that's why I'm persisting, because I know that I tend to be very abstract and I have to make things clearer. But I feel everything in my diagram has been justified. If you miss the justification, now when I'm told the justifications are irrelevant because that's not my system, yes, then I react emotionally. But when I'm told I don't see why this, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And I need to clarify and I have to do my homework. But I feel I've done it, and maybe not well enough, and let's perfect that. And that's a process I'm totally willing to go through. But saying, let's go one at a time, sure, but we've been there.
But we don't get there together in an organized fashion. We
Okay,
are
fair
not
enough.
getting closer. We're not. We're just going in circles.
But I feel we're going in circles because whenever I go through the steps don't get acknowledged. And that's my frustration. Your frustration is we're going in circles. My frustration is we're going in circles because whatever I lay down gets discarded. Sorry, but that's my perception of the process.
Well, I think what you're laying down is often not getting absorbed because it's and I think part of that is the order in the presentation.
And that I'm perfectly willing to spend time on perfecting. I mean, I know the way I present is not working, and that's my problem. Obviously, there's a flaw in how I'm presenting things.
Yeah, but it's also, a complex thing. So there's not a direct.
But when you tell me, we need to look at steps one at a time, I did do that presentation a while ago, which was one slide at a time, so I could bring things one at a time precisely and justify it.
But the difference would be one use case at a time, right?
What?
The difference would be one use case at a time.
Yeah, and it wasn't, the use cases were a bit implicit, and I'll try to make them more explicit, but I did justify every step and every line in the diagram.
Well, I suggest that what's missing also is the discussion at each step, so we understand each step.
And where I think Stephen brought something useful is that, okay, it's not obvious because it's not obvious because it's everything at a time, and we need to cut it in layers. And Felix made the same point earlier, and that is perfectly valid. And part of the effort I need to make in presenting my stuff is finding a way to layer it. So, but it's true that I tend to layer it from the bottom, and people don't see why. And layering it from the top is counterintuitive to me, but I'll make the effort.
It's weird you say top. I would switch those there. I always think
but I know what you meant. Yeah,
from the atoms and not from the molecules. And it's true that the use case are more at the level of the molecules, but on the other hand, the use case justify distinguishing the atoms.
Yeah.
So it's past our stop time.
Yeah.
I would like to end this meeting with one use case we all agree on, which is the most minimal use case we want, just to see whether that process will or can work. Which is a direct question to Timothy, of course.
Yeah, he did do that actually.
Yeah, I've already done two.
Already a lot of questions come up, so I just want to pinpoint those.
Yeah, but they're questions about the future, not questions about the model so far.
And
that's what I want to avoid, are questions about the future.
Yeah, that's fair. But so
your future is my present.
If you propose one use case and you can be stated, because I'm not certain I'll remember correctly, then I wonder how you would model that in the current model.
Not in the current model, with a new model.
No,
so, we don't have a current model. So we have Marc-Antoine's suggested model.
A claim, or what was it?
Tim, what was your?
with a sentence, by putting in a sentence.
Yeah. So then you would model what exactly? Like one
I would
claim?
model a box, a class called user, and a class called claim with a text field, and I would put an arrow to user from claim to user that says creator, or created by, or something. That would be it.
So what type of model is this?
I do class diagrams. I think it works better for.
Well, that's implying we have a class for a user, and I think that that's a step beyond what's
No,
necessary.
but
I think
it
we did that
solves
in
the
the
current
past.
problem. Class for user solves the current problem. If we want to say, I don't want the system to remember anybody, and I don't want logins or permissions or anything, then that's a discussion we should have. No, there are no users. But I haven't put any attributes in the user.
Okay.
I've
No,
just
but
said-
so that's what you model, and then who uses that? What's the goal of that model? Why do you want it used? Like that's the use.
What is the goal of that model is that we all agree that should happen in whichever system we design, right?
Yeah. So then, if you're gonna add a user, is that a user ID? ID, is that a UID? Is that a string? Is that a how are you gonna make that choice?
If you want to make that choice immediately, we make that choice. That's the discussion we have. If you would like to table that for now, then we can leave it vague, right?
I think that would, yeah, that would be a separate user story.
So
yeah, I don't
from-
know if it's a separate user story
that's
because
kind
it
of
would
different.
come out of needs, requirements that we haven't defined yet. So I would probably leave it vague, right? Because we haven't defined requirements for that yet. But yeah, that's all you would need to solve that use case.
All I'm hinting at is that users are a different bound context than argument modeling, and we might have different users and different requirements.
Yeah,
on our-
you're worrying about the future. You're worrying about the future. That's
What
what
is
I'm trying to
present?
avoid
The most
doing.
simple use case you just brought forward, and already now I'm not agreeing. I want to link a user to my argument model, which I also don't do in my current system, by the way. I don't have users in my claims.
You don't have users.
No, they're external.
Um,
They linked externally from different stuff, but it doesn't
You
matter.
have
I
users. No, you're talking about a separate bounded context or whatever implementation. You're not solving the current problem. That's why we never get anywhere. Is we are always worrying about, oh, this doesn't match my system. Of course it doesn't. We're building up to we're what is it, recapitulating the design that brought us all to where we are today. We're doing it one step at a time with requirements together until we have a shared agreement on what are the requirements and what are.
Very clearly is that you're suggesting that the requirements we're collecting are for a new system that we all intend to work on, and that's
because because there's a use case that says a user from system A creates a claim in system A, and that gets replicated to system B or something like that. That would be a separate use case. We're trying to keep it simple to limit to focus our discussions on as little conflict as possible until we bring up that conflict. We don't want to bring up 5 conflicts, because what's going to happen is that no, but I want to authenticate via Google, and I want to authenticate via this, and I want a federated system. Oh, let's talk about Google authentication, federated systems, unique identities, and all that, all at the same time.
Fully agreed,
Let's
which is
not.
exactly why you leave users out of the argument model. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying keep it even simpler.
No,
That's
it's
I-
like you don't
I-
understand refactoring. Refactoring is the moment your model does not match your set of requirements, you change it. And sometimes those changes are adding a field, and sometimes they are splitting something into 2 totally different subsystems. The scale, the size of the refactoring happens according to the need of the next use case. It's not something you need to, immediately know where you're going.
Stephen, just out of curiosity, it seems to me, even with bounded contexts, there are entities that cross, that are used in two contexts, right? There are entities at the intersection. And for me, the user box would exist in the argument modeling context. It's just that its elaboration would belong to another context.
Yeah, cross-bound context, you typically only share UIDs, identities of different, what you could call aggregate roots, and you fill those in however you see fit. You add the data relevant to that bound context. So even though they share the same, they're not the same entity, they're different entities. They're just linked.
They just share identity. I hear you. Okay, it's.
But what Tim is suggesting is just it doesn't matter if like there's a user there or not. The user box is vague.
It does matter. No, it doesn't matter. Okay, I fully get that. It doesn't matter because you can remove the user
somewhere
after.
else.
But we're talking. We're talking about different bound contexts. I'm not interested in developing the system that we're all going to build, and I'm interested in developing the shared model we're all interested in. That's where the distinction lies. That's why this use case you bring forward as the most primitive one is not one.
And what you're saying, Stephen, can be justified with one simple use case, and then
yeah, that's why I last meeting suggested more like as a developer, I want to load an argument graph and I want to define what an argument graph is, and I want more development oriented. And yeah, sure, you can formulate them in the form of a user, because if a user does this, that means that a developer needs to call something that gets redirected to the argument model. But I want more developer-focused use cases, because that's...
Look, bottom line for me is this. If we cannot work together in a manner that is leaving off discussions that are irrelevant to a specific moment, with the trust that we will get to the moment that it is relevant, I cannot work with this group. I cannot work with this group and get somewhere if people are incapable of curbing their fears that we're not going to cover a use case and need to cloud the current discussion with their fear of a use case that they want included now. If we can't focus on one little thing, we can't get anywhere.
But I don't see how it's focusing. I am focusing on this one little use case you bring forward, which is...
No, you're focusing on what the use case isn't doing for you. You're focusing on what it's not doing for you, and that's not the point.
No, this is addressed to me, so I'll answer.
Nobody wants to use this system I've defined. Nobody wants to use it, but that's okay, because we know that that thing needs to happen in some way in every system.
Okay, let's get through this. The fear of, it's not fear, it's about bringing in another use case is not fear. It's about saying this use case is relevant to this model. And yes, I have a broader set of use cases I want to consider as core than you. And that's part of what the contention is, because, and yeah, you call it future, I call it, this is for me, yeah, refactoring can be done, but I mean, there's a point where the question is how difficult is the refactoring, and especially when we're doing an interchange format, if there are use cases which we know are there and not in the far future, but there for some of us, that have a huge impact on the sharing format, I don't see how bringing them in is fear. It's about saying this is relevant now. And this is where we keep...
but it's not relevant now if we're focusing on a single use case. It's not relevant now.
We can, we can do that, but when we're doing the modeling, I understand we can do it one use case at a time, but at some point we will move on and bringing the next use case. And the question is, why not now? Because it has an impact on the model.
Well, they all have impacts on the model.
Yeah, right. Every single use case has an impact on the model.
Yes, correct. And there I agree. I mean, worrying about and there again, it may be worth doing it two ways, because what you want to do is grow the model one use case at a time from nothing in tabula rasa, and maybe that's worth going through. And what I'm trying to do is to say, I have this model, and let me show how the restriction of this model to this use case fits the use case or not, in which case I have to evolve my model. I mean, there are My model's evolved. It's not perfect yet. That's why I'm here also. But saying, does that model as it is follow that use case, allow that use case or not? But I am dealing with a more complex model because I am trying to have the overall vision of, do I handle all these use cases? And it's not irrelevant in that process to worry about other use cases, about, oh, if I restrict it this way to fit that use case, am I losing that other use case? Which is what we do when we do test-driven development. We make sure that satisfying one use case doesn't break the other use case, and it's valid to do that. So maybe we need to do that. Like, I work by restriction of my overall model, you work by constructing, and maybe that's a way to share the days.
Let's
Okay.
try that.
Well, yes. I mean, I think we already agreed 30 minutes to try that ago. And I think we decided to split it among 2 meetings. And right now we're still arguing about which meeting to have when we already said we're going to have 2. So
yeah,
let's just have the 2 meetings, and let's go ahead and let Mark be the dictator, Mark Antoine be the dictator of the Tuesdays. And
okay, I'm gonna propose then what basically Bentley's proposing. Why don't we have one dictator per approach until at least we have come to a conclusion of if an approach is not getting us anywhere. But as long as we are finding value in an approach, we have one dictator per approach. So I'll be the dictator for the bottom-up approach.
yeah, so
Marc Antoine, you can be one, and I think Stephen will want to be one as well from the bounded domains approach. So maybe we need 3 days.
I would like to propose continuing that, yeah, because we didn't really try it, and I think it is a very good top-down approach indeed, where we can try to have a use case driven, but rather than doing one use case at a time, look at a lot of use cases and bound them basically. I would like to do that, yes. And I have the impression Marc Antoine might be on board with that approach.
I am. I did say I was on board with layering and bounding. We'll be arguing about boundaries, but I'm on board with bounding.
So we have bottom-up days and top-down days, right?
I think maybe we have 3 days. We have bottom up, top down, and maybe we have the Marc Antoine discussion of, is CD a constraint on his system, or is his system an extension of CD?
I think the top-down approach will naturally.
Okay, so let's do a top-down day and a bottom-up day. Sound good?
Sounds good.
yeah, so I propose we skip the first, and let's go ahead and keep the top downs on Tuesdays and the bottom ups on Fridays. So the next meeting will be top down, Marc Antoine being the dictator, Stephen being the co-dictator or the sub-dictator, dictator's assistant. Anyways, conscientious observer, whatever. Okay, so we will talk next Tuesday on the 5th.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. That was amazing.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Ciao, ciao.
Right. Bye-bye.
Sorry again.
No problem.
No worries.